Oh my goodness. So we've covered a lot so far already, and tonight it's going to be a doozy for sure. So just a heads up, whenever it comes to this subject, there are a few times that it may make some people uncomfortable. I try and, again, I like to shoot straight and make sure everybody gets the picture, but at the same time, I'm not going to go in full detail, but there are some points that are going to be probably uncomfortable for some people. So just a heads up. So tonight we're going to be covering MKUltra, where it came from, as well as the Monarch mind control program. And we're going to be discussing a few of their tactics along the way, so we understand what's going on and how it may apply to some of the stuff that we're seeing today, which it absolutely is. Now, just right off the bat, because I know there's going to be a whole bunch of people after this leaving comments. Well, you forgot to talk about this. And did you know about that? Why didn't you talk about this? MKUltra, like I said, is a project, and it's a topic that I could probably do an entire series about because of how huge it is. If you guys don't know, MKUltra isn't just one project. It's 150 sub-projects under it. We're not going to go over all that. There's a lot of history, a lot of names, and a lot of things to go with that. We're not going to be going over it. So I'm just going to be covering some specific stuff that I think is good for the theme of what we're going over, and it's good to know. So we'll cover just enough to get the idea of what's going on with this. So the first thing we're going to start out with, though, is I think having just the central idea of what was the point of MKUltra. Can we answer that question in a very short and concise way? What was their goal? Why were they doing it? What were they trying to accomplish with MKUltra? Just like this.
In this note from White's diaries, it says, "Call Lovell regarding TD." TD was a rather transparent cover for Truth Drug. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims. The committee soon learned there was no easy panacea, no truth drug at this stage. But White and later colleagues would not stop trying. The goal remained the same. As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation.
All right, did you guys hear that? At the end is the main point of what they were trying to do, to control somebody, to have them go against their own will to do the bidding of those who are in control, going so far as to even go against survival. That is what they were trying to accomplish in just the base foundation of MKUltra. They were trying to develop tactics, specifically one single tactic that they can use in order to control somebody's mind against their own will and to do the bidding of those who are in control. And so that's ultimately what they were trying to accomplish with MKUltra. So I think having that idea is a good idea, because that's the fundamental understanding, because there's so much with MKUltra that we can lose track of really what they were trying to accomplish. And that right there is exactly what's going on. So before we get into MKUltra, where did it come from? Well, first we back up to 1947. There was a project called Project Chatter, which was run by none other than the United States Navy. And basically what they were doing is they were trying to use drugs and interrogation tactics in order to break open the minds of the enemy soldiers that they had. So they were actually, the United States Navy was working on a project in order to break into people's minds using drugs and interrogation. This was Project Chatter, which then folded into a new project, a bigger project in 1949 by the name of Project Bluebird. And Bluebird eventually changed into Project Artichoke in 1951. So 47, it was Project Chatter, went bigger in 1949 with Project Bluebird, and then ultimately Bluebird went into a bigger project in 1951 called Project Artichoke. This was actually Project Artichoke at this point. This was actually the CIA's initial mind control program that focused on training agents to obtain intelligence both domestically and overseas by using torture, hypnosis, and of course, psychedelic drugs. And so this was the United States program of trying to develop what Nazi Germany was working on with their own stuff at the time. So basically all they could do is they could just gather intel and research from Germany at the time in order to bring back and try and evolve their own version of their mind control program. So ultimately, it was trying to do what the Nazi scientists were doing. And if you guys don't know, the Nazi scientists were all wrapped up in the occult. I actually did a kind of a breakdown of where it all came from in the Aliens and Demons series, where I talk about the two different societies, the Thule and the Vril societies, and how it was all demonic and occultic. And that's really what drove Nazism forward. And so the entire program that they were doing is they were taking the supernatural and the spiritual occultic elements, and they were applying it to physical, mental, and sexual tactics, combining those together in order to try and break the minds of humans. Right off the bat, we understand how absolutely evil and satanic this absolutely is, because that's what it is. It is absolutely evil. It's satanic. So this was the project that was inspired by from the Nazis and their intel extraction program from the POW camps. So Nazi Germany was using this, of course, on the Jews. We understand that. They were using it on children as well as the prisoner of war camps that were going on. They were using these tactics. The program of Project Artichoke actually had various techniques, but it mainly consisted of 4. Remember, this is early on when the United States was still trying to get this project like going, fully understanding what they were doing. And so they mainly focused on 4 techniques. So we're going to take a look at these techniques for Project Bluebird Artichoke. And let's see. Technique number 1, I'm sure everybody is aware of this one. Should be no surprise. Drug therapy. They used specifically psychedelic as well as stimulant drugs to try and break through to these people. The CIA would administer various mind-altering drugs like LSD, mescaline, as well as stimulants, including amphetamines. They would use a combination of these different doses at different times in order to try to wear down the minds of these people in order to get in and extract intelligence that they had or implant new ideas that were going on. The goal was to try and control the thought process and stimulate the memory to give up the specific details that they were looking for. Keep in mind, this project wasn't just for military purposes. It wasn't just overseas with prisoners and stuff like that. They were using this domestically as well, like we're going to get into in just a second. And so they would use these drugs. And if you guys if that sounds familiar, if you guys remember, we talked about the cults and how they often use drugs in them. Jim Jones, Charles Manson, and so on and so forth. Drugs was a heavy part of controlling not only the cult leaders, but as well as the followers of those cult leaders as well. So what exactly is going on with LSD and what effect did it have going on? Well, let's take a look.
The discovery was lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. The film that you see is considered by many experts to be the closest illustration of the effects of a hallucinogenic.
It was one of the first times that anybody had run into a powerful drug that was different than anything else that they knew anything about.
John Gittinger, recently retired chief psychologist for the CIA. This is the first time Gittinger has been interviewed publicly.
We could disable a whole city by putting a very small amount on a water supply. After all of these years of us, those of us who are involved in looking for this secret drug, this was the only thing that began to look for the first time like it might be something like that.
Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country. And word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that It was an intelligence-enhancing, consciousness-raising experience.
History will judge the role of the CIA and other intelligence agencies in unwittingly contributing to the counterculture of the 60s through their intense interest in LSD and other hallucinogenics. But for the moment at least, the argument can be made that the CIA helped usher in the age of Aquarius.
Yeah, there's a lot there. So ultimately, there's a lot that's revealed to us about the idea of them specifically using LSD in order to break people's minds because of the psychedelic effect that it can have on one's mind. It's opening up somebody's mind to new ideas, to revealing new information. It's kind of like a truth thing. It also allows different things when it comes to, if you want to get into the spiritual, dimensional type stuff, as well as the ability to draw demons in, to bring in the darkness as well and surround the person. These things are open doorways for people's minds. And so they were specifically using it. You even talk, the guy there who was an ex-CIA psychologist during the MKUltra program, the dude with the beard there, he was talking. He talked about you could put a little bit in the water supply and take out a whole town. Well, if you go into the history of the CIA, they absolutely did that. There's even one story specifically, Pont something in France. It's a French village back in, I think it was 51. I believe it was 51, where everybody basically started getting sick and started seeing hallucinations and started going crazy because the CIA poisoned the water supply of that French village in order to see how it happened. I think it was either 3 or 7 people died, like 20 something people were actually like super injured because of it. And these things were actually going on during this time, testing LSD on not just outside, but the most outside overseas, but also domestically as well, which we'll talk about in just a second, because it was talking about the 60s movement that was going on, the anti-culture or the age of Aquarius. Again, if you want to know a little bit about that, I go over the age of Aquarius in the Aliens and Demons series as well. And so using this drug in order to move society in the direction that they wanted to go, to create a counter culture, which ultimately in the 60s, that's what happened. That was the hippie movement. That was the drug movement. All the psychedelic drugs started going streetwide during the time, LSD and mushrooms and these other different ones that were going on. And that was actually part of what the CIA was doing at the time. So what am I talking about? Well, this was a part of the major element to mix for mind control programs early on, with many tests being conducted upon average unknowing citizens. Back in that time, they didn't know that there was some project going on. They didn't know it was the CIA who was flooding the streets with LSD at the time. They didn't know that. They just thought it was a good time. A new drug was on the street. Let's party. Let's be hippie. Let's go against this type of stuff. And that included a man that we have already discussed in the series. Again, if you want to go back and check out the cult stuff, Charles Manson. Charles Manson was not just a test subject of LSD mind control, but he was actually a successful product of the CIA's MKUltra program. Some people already know that, some people don't. But ultimately, he was one of the main tests, and he was one of the successful tests of this. When Charles Manson was eventually released from prison against his wishes, by the way, when he was being released early, he said, "Don't do this. Keep me in here." And they said, "No, we want you to go out there." He was given a parole officer by the name of Roger Smith. Now, Roger Smith was actually a part of a CIA-funded program researching LSD and drug use in San Francisco. San Francisco also held one of the CIA's MKUltra safe houses, which they were using for multiple things, including Charles Manson, LSD on the street, and some other stuff that we'll get to a little bit later on with this thing. And so Roger Smith, who was Manson's parole officer, was actually the one who was teamed up with the department or the safe house that was working on LSD in San Francisco. Roger Smith, with the help from CIA-funded pharmacists, created, provided, and encouraged Manson to use LSD and recruit others with LSD. It's all starting to make a little bit more sense now, isn't it? Being that Smith, Roger Smith here, was his parole officer, Manson was able to operate without any worry of having his crimes reported. That was the key. He was able to freely move and do all this stuff, and he never had to worry about getting caught for anything because his parole officer was there to specifically make it all go away so Manson could continue to operate, working on the MKUltra program that Roger Smith and his pharmacy buddy were working on. Also, the same clinic of Smith. So Roger Smith, he was a doctorate student at a clinic while he was the parole officer, as well as that other pharmacist, David Smith, basically was a CIA psychologist and LSD study lead, along with a guy by the name of Lewis West, who just happened to work for the head of the MKUltra program, Sidney Gottlieb. So ultimately, they had a 4-man team working on Manson as well as the streets of San Francisco at the same time. Sidney Gottlieb was the head of the MKUltra program, but with Roger Smith, David Smith, as well as Lewis West, they were the ones that were overseeing Charles Manson and the Manson family by making sure that they had enough supply to keep him and his cult working properly. And so they were able to manipulate and use him for their own project that was going on. So ultimately, what we had going on was that movement in San Francisco that we went in depth with on the cult episode was really part of the CIA's MKUltra program. All that counterculture that was going on, the CIA was the one stirring it up, along with the drug movement going on. This is what I mean when it comes to mind control, where it's not just grabbing a hold of an individual and puppeteering that person, but it's about grabbing the minds of the masses, grabbing society, big chunks of society, and moving them in the direction that they want to be, or that they want them to go. And this is ultimately part of what we saw back in the 60s that was going on. All right, so let's get back to Bluebird here. So that's one of the techniques that they were using, was drug therapy. What is number 2? Hypnotism. Lovely hypnotism. Just a warning. Hypnotism is not some fancy little, parlor trick that a lot of people think it is. This is something that has roots that goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. And a lot of the doctors and healers and mystics that were back then used hypnotism in order to open portals within people's minds. It is not a funny thing to do. So are we surprised to see that that's part of what they were doing when it comes to the mind control program? Hypnotism included employing trained hypnotists that allowed them to subconsciously extract and implant intelligence as well as ideas. And so they were using this in order to make slaves, mental slaves, to extract information as well as implant ideas and make them their slave, pretty much. What is the other one going on? Sensory deprivation. Sensory deprivation includes locking people in blackout rooms and soundproof tanks, and it's basically locking one's mind in an environment without any sensory stimulant, which would then weaken their mind and break their reality. Now, a lot of people use these sensory deprivation tanks for therapy now. It's kind of becoming a popular thing. I'm starting to see them in like spas and massage parlors and stuff like that. This isn't anything to be dabbling with either. A lot of them even say that you should not spend any longer than this amount of time per week in one of those things because of the mental impact that's going on. That's kind of like drugs. Don't take this amount of drugs because then it'll start messing with your head. It's basically the same thing. When you put somebody in an environment where everything is black, you are just free floating. Usually it's filled with water and you just float there, as well as there's no sound. You can't hear anything. All of a sudden you start retreating within your mind and it starts breaking what reality is. I've seen videos of these people who've spent anywhere from 8 to 10 hours in these tanks. And when they come out, it's like a newborn baby. They don't even know who they are or where they have been for the past time. It takes a long time for them to actually regain all that stuff back. So just think, extended periods of time of sensory deprivation can really mess up somebody's mind when it comes to this type of stuff. And last but not least, torture. This is one that we see often with most types of mind control. Is breaking them physically will break them mentally. Torture is exactly what you think. That includes electric shock, waterboarding, Chinese water torture, which if you don't know that is, they strap you to a board and they just have just every once in a while one drop of water on your forehead, and you do that for an extended period of time. Starts to drive people nuts, as well as solitary confinement and that type of stuff. So torture can be wrapped up in with other drugs and sensory deprivation and all that type of stuff. So those are the 4 techniques that were used early on with Artichoke, Project Artichoke. First Chatter, then Bluebird, then Artichoke. And so those were the 4 that the United States was really working on at the time before we came into MKUltra. And so this is where it expands into what we know it. Wanting to expand the project, Allan Dulles, who was the CIA director, went and launched Operation Paperclip. So basically, Operation Paperclip, after the fall of the Third Reich, Dulles, who was an associate of Germany's Heinrich Himmler, basically, I break him down over on the Aliens and Demons series as well. Again, these kind of go hand in hand a little bit on this episode. So if you haven't seen that series, go check it out and it'll answer some questions. But Allan Dulles, who was the CIA director at the time, was associate and friends with Heinrich Himmler. Imagine that. And basically, Dulles brought in roughly about 2,000 Nazi scientists. He falsified all their files, giving them new names and new backgrounds, and folded them into various government departments, mainly the CIA. Now, this is where we, again, Aliens and Demons series, I talked about a guy by the name of Werner von Braun, and basically he was the one who warned about the alien attack with Project Bluebeam and stuff like that. Well, he was also one of the Nazi scientists brought over. But they folded them into all different aspects of the government, but mainly the CIA. And so we can actually look at some pictures of old newspapers that broke this news. You can see, give us your tired, your poor, your Nazi scientists, German scientists recruited by the United States. You can see the picture there of some of them who were brought over, dressing them up, making them look like Americans, and all that jazz. But basically the goal was to bring over the research, the occultic, the satanic, the mind control stuff, their technology, bring all that stuff over into the United States. A lot of people say we defeated Nazi Germany back in the day. We really didn't. We captured Nazi Germany and brought it into the United States. That's ultimately what was going on. So it was never defeated. It just got folded over into other stuff that we see going on in front of us today. Isn't that a lovely thought? But that's really what's going on. Seeing that the CIA's Bluebird and Artichoke program was designed after Nazi Germany's, why not bring in the original creators? This meant that all of the occultic ritual and information and research and technology came along with them, including the human experimentation that they were doing on the Jews, on the children, and on other non-Germanic society people. All their technology came over, their research, their biotech, as well as drugs, all came over as well. And came along with that was the satanic occultic practices that they surrounded much of their experimentation around. This meant that Artichoke was then folded into the new program called MKUltra as we know it today. MKUltra was a program that again focused on mind control as well as mental replacement, psychological kidnapping. They wanted to replace the personalities of people. Utilizing drugs, physical and sexual abuse allowed the CIA to break open the human mind and gain information or plant new information or personalities and on all that type of stuff. Just think, if you can break into somebody's mind, A good idea if you haven't seen it. A good reference if you want to see a visual of what this would look like. Check out the movie Inception, because the whole goal is about getting into somebody's mind and implanting an idea and making them believe that it was actually their idea as well. So that's a good idea, or a good mental projection if you want to see what's going on with what they were trying to accomplish. Various programs included safe houses. CIA MKUltra safe houses in New York and San Francisco that was used to run human experiments, to release drugs into the criminal underground. They went after more of the petty criminals rather than the hardcore ones, because the petty criminals were just desperate enough to take it, but they weren't financed enough to actually go against them if anything was to break open, which means Charles Manson was the perfect solution for that, because he was part of the petty criminal underground, as well as run honeypot missions with prostitutes and brothels. That was one of their main things, of trying to get prostitutes and dancers on board, hook them up with drugs, get them alone with certain people, and it allowed them to extract information, because if you have a person who is high as well as aroused, the prostitutes were able to get into their minds more easily. So they ran those things as well. The CIA also funded, here we go, CIA also funded a major project in Nigeria, which was researching witch doctors back in the day. Basically, they sent a team of researchers under government grants, secret government grants. So the people who went over there didn't even know that they were working for the CIA. The CIA set up fronts in order to give grants to these people. But a team of researchers went into Nigeria to study and record the esoteric practices used by nature healers for mental illness. And so they would go in and record video. They would watch what they're doing, research, study the different types of potions and drugs and crystals and the practices that they would do. A lot of it had to do with chaining people up and doing things to their heads and all that type of stuff. And so they sent the researcher teams in there to go and study actual witch doctors in Nigeria, so they can take that information and bring it over into the MKUltra program as well. So drugs, potions, rituals, hypnosis, sleep therapy, and other practices were recorded and researched and folded into the MKUltra program to be used to advance the project forward. So we've got drugs, we've got torture, we've got satanic occultism, we got Nazism, and we've got shaman, witch doctor, esoteric occultic practices, all being wrapped up in the MKUltra. There is nothing good that came from this. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Many of the MKUltra programs were funded under, like I said, front organizations to make sure secrecy and trust were kept while using unsuspecting researchers. And this is something that they've used, the Cabal and Luciferians have used for decades before, and it's still something that they use today. They set up shell corporations and nonprofit organizations in order to feed money into projects that they want to get done, but they don't want the money trail to get back to them. The CIA was doing the exact same thing when it came to researching on this stuff. One of these fronts was the Human Ecology Fund, which was used to fund several MKUltra projects in Canada. So, the Canadians, if you're up north, that's right. CIA was in your territory. They still are, by the way. And they were doing a lot of research back then. That included one of the most extreme institutions that we know of. Again, that we know of. And it's by the name of Ravenscraig. Let's check this out.
By far, the most chilling experiments we have uncovered took place at this Gothic estate called Ravenscraig, halfway up Mount Royal in Montreal. It houses the Allan Memorial Institute of Psychiatry of McGill University. It was here that the CIA funded a series of experiments, severe experiments. The work was done by the Institute's then director, Dr. Ewen Cameron. It is the closest experimentation to brainwashing yet disclosed. His work, unprecedented in psychiatry, consisted of 3 areas which he called sleep therapy, psychic driving, and the ultimate depatterning. Dr. Maurice Dongier, current head of the Allan Memorial Institute.
In his psychic driving, so-called type of therapy, he would give the patient intensive electric treatment in order to make the patient regress deeply, become forgetful, and then he would attempt to implant new ideas in the mind of the patient.
Now, to a layman, it would appear that Dr. Cameron was trying to take the slate and wipe it clean, the slate being the mind. In other words, brainwashing.
Exactly, that's a very good comparison.
Brainwashing.
Yes, to life.
The largest MKUltra research project, this one directly related to brainwashing, was carried out at the university's psychiatric hospital, the Allan Memorial Institute. Located atop Mount Royal in a mansion with the eerie name of Ravenscraig, the Allan Memorial was once the most prestigious mental hospital in Canada. The unorthodox treatments of its director caught the attention of the CIA in the mid-50s. Dr. Ewen Cameron, the first director of the Allan Memorial, ran the institute with an iron hand for 20 years. But Dr. Cameron remained an American citizen and left the Allan abruptly in 1964. He returned to the United States, where he died in 1967. An energetic, enigmatic man, Cameron was an internationally honored and respected psychiatrist, but he was not universally liked. The CIA was interested in Dr. Cameron's work on psychic driving because it could give them an idea of where the personality could break or be stressed.
Those of us who were involved with trying to find out something about brainwashing, yes, this is the reason that we were interested in Dr. Cameron's work.
Patients came to the Allan Memorial Institute from all across Canada. Dr. Ewen Cameron, it was said, would give them the best psychiatric care money could buy. But some of the patients had no idea that a lot of their treatment, the LSD, the massive doses of electric shock, the sleep therapy, was highly experimental.
Had no idea because they were doing it on unconsenting patients. Just like all the street drugs and stuff that they were putting out on all unconsenting people. See, the goal here was to make sure that people didn't know that they were under this, and they were doing it completely illegally. But again, who cares? You know, CIA, they're above all that stuff. They don't care. They can do whatever they want to do. So we're getting an idea here when it comes to Ravenscraig and this Dr. Cameron guy. He was one of the more extreme that's on record, so to say. And we can kind of go through some of the stuff that he did. So Cameron's projects took unknowing and those who didn't consent, the patients, and applied extreme forms of drug therapy, psychic driving, sleep therapy, as well as patterning. Much of what he was doing came straight from what the Nazis were doing to Jewish children. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on this. That's an extreme one we're not going to get into. But much of what we were seeing here, and I've seen pictures too, let me tell you. But much of what Cameron was doing on adults came from what the Nazis were doing to Jewish children back in the day. So let's take a look at some of the things that Cameron was doing in Ravenscraig. Now, drug therapy, we're aware of drug therapy. We can see what's going on with that. We've really covered all that. Psychic driving is a big one that we see a lot when it comes to stuff going on our TV screens and music and this type of stuff. Psychic driving, I've made reference to in the past, where the 7-Eleven worship songs, where it's just these songs that keep repeating lines over and over and over and over again, are actually rooted in psychic driving that came from the MKUltra program. And again, if you follow the track of where the music comes from to who's in control of it and who's in control of them, it will lead you back to what's going on with this. So let's take a look. Psychic driving is about keeping a sedated mind in a state of hearing repetitious messages 24/7, allowing the message to fully sink into the mind and become the basically the patient's own belief. This is about a repeating message over and over and over and over, breaking somebody's head, implanting it into their mind. Even if they're actively rejecting it, it's still getting down in there. And all of a sudden, they will believe it and they will accept it as their own belief, even if they're not on board with it. And so this is where that term, hear a lie so many times you begin to believe it. That's where this comes from, is psychic driving. This is where that was born from. Now, the other one on the list is sleep therapy. Sleep therapy includes keeping a patient asleep for 20 to 30 days straight while continuously being fed psychedelic drugs. They would sedate patients 20, 30, sometimes 40 days straight, day and night. Keep them in like a hibernating status, which lowers the mind wall, and puts them into a state where they're more inclined to believe things. This is why we see a lot of self-help tapes and stuff where often listen to this while you sleep, because you're more inclined to believe this type of stuff. And so they would put these people in these hibernated states 20, 30, 40 days at a time, feeding them drugs, and they would usually be doing psychic driving at the same time, replaying a specific phrase or a paragraph over and over and over again the entire time to see if they can try and get into the mind of somebody. It's absolutely sick what they were doing. And last but not least, deep patterning. Now, deep patterning is, well, I'll try and make it easy to digest, so to say. Deep patterning is the use of electroshock straight to the heads of their patients with voltage sometimes 20 times higher than the normal procedure. Basically, they strap these people down. They put on, if you've ever seen like a TENS machine, they have like the little pads and you can like put it on like where you have sore muscles or whatever. They put those in strategic spots on the person's head and then just crank the voltage and send shocks into the minds of people. Deep patterning is ultimately about destroying the personality entirely. This isn't about this isn't about, getting rid of certain ideas, implanting ideas, or anything like that. This is actually about destroying the person's original personality and replacing it with a brand new one. There's some people, I'll mention one specifically a little bit later when we get into this, when we get into the Monarch stuff, where you see a person who was lit up, full of life, full of personality. They were unique, and it was just who they are. And then all of a sudden something changed and they became like a zombie. Like they don't even know the basics of just a societal interaction, just conversating with somebody. It's like they're a robot type of thing. A lot of it has to do with deep patterning and what was going on with that. Now, another project being studied in MKUltra, switching over from Ravenscraig to a different project, was one called Russian isolation tactics. Now, this included separating somebody from all contact except for one person. So you take somebody and you put them in a room. They're not allowed to see, to hear, to talk to interact with anybody except one person. And it can only be that one person. That's the only person that they get to communicate with. And basically what they would do is they would have that patient write out their life story over and over and over again. And while they were writing out their life story, that one person they're allowed to interact with can ask questions about their life. And so as they're writing their life story, and they just have to keep writing it, you go through your entire life, go back, write it all over again, go back, write it all over again. And during that time, they'll be asking questions to that person about their life. And over a period of time, you're actually going to get the person's mind to break, where they're not going to believe their own life story that they're writing, because as they're writing it over and over and over again, their memories begin to change. When they're answering questions regarding this stuff, they will answer a question differently than how they write it. The person would point it out and go, so which one is true? They didn't know which one was true, and it was their own memory. It was their own life. And so they all of a sudden don't even know who they are anymore, which allowed them to implement brand new memories and new life stories into the person, creating an entirely different one where the person doesn't even know what is true and what is reality anymore. The goal is to get the person to begin to question their own memories and history, allowing the interrogator to plant answers that would then become their new memories, and they didn't know any better. This was actually tested, and was proven to be possible as both the Soviet Union as well as Korea was able to brainwash American soldiers. This is where they got the idea from, is they had American soldiers coming home who were in Korea and Soviet camps and whatnot, and they would come home and they would be brand new indoctrinating, where there would be repeating anti-American rhetoric, as well as promoting communistic values at the time. And it wasn't just like they changed their mind. You know, when somebody changes their mind politically or anything like that, you can tell it's still the same person, but they just, you know, oh, well, I'm going to switch over to this type of thing. No, these people were zombies. They were walking zombies, American soldiers coming home, and they were just repeating anti-American rhetoric and pro-communistic communism and all that type of stuff. And so this was actually proven to be true, and the MKUltra program took it and implemented it into their own program as well. So what else was the CIA working on? I mean, we've covered a lot so far. Drug therapy, torture, Russian isolation, Ravenscraig, and all the things that they're doing when it comes to sleep therapy and depatterning and psychic driving and all this stuff. What else was going on? Well, let's take a look and see some stuff that is going to ring true to what we are actually witnessing today. Let's take a look.
Of the hundreds of behavioral projects undertaken by the CIA, Gittinger's appears to have been one of the more successful and more conventional. Other experiments were not as conventional. Neurophysicist Dr. Jose Delgado was financed by the Office of Naval Research. In this experiment, the bull is sedated. Electrodes are implanted in its brain. Delgado transmits an electronic impulse to the center of the bull's brain. Delgado has remote control of the animal. Recently released CIA documents refer to the feasibility of remote control of animals, and that special investigations will be conducted toward the application of selected elements of these techniques to man. Other areas were examined through the 60s and 70s. Brain surgery, psychosurgery, creation of amnesia, parapsychology, manipulation of genes. Even though past and present CIA officials have indicated this kind of work ended in 1963.
Did you guys catch that? Did you catch what they were doing? They would take a bull or another animal, sedate it, then put electrodes into the brain, which allowed them to control the animal. And they said they were testing this on animals to eventually put it into humans. Does that sound like anything familiar of what we got going on today? That's a brain-computer interface, or BCI. Things that DARPA, Synchron, BlackRock Neurotech, and Neuralink are working on. That's exactly what they were doing over 55 years ago. They were testing this. You don't think that they haven't got it working yet? I do. I absolutely believe that they've got it working. For sure. They were working, MKUltra was working on brain electrodes to stick into humans back then. What else did they mention? He listed off a few things. Well, talked about the creation of amnesia being something that MKUltra was working on. Now, I've talked about this a little bit, where frequency, we haven't gotten to the frequency stuff yet. We'll get into that. Not tonight, but later in the series. But utilizing frequency and certain sounds and tones can allow the ability to create amnesia or short-term memory loss. Something else that comes from that, from the supernatural side of things, has to do with short-term demon possession can also do this as well. Well, what am I talking about? This is becoming a normal thing in today's music. It's been around for a while, but it's becoming more and more, it's becoming increasingly common for people going to specific artists' concerts and having amnesia, not remembering anything at the show. And this is becoming a recurring theme for all things Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift fans really do get concert amnesia after the tour. Says, since the Erase tour began last year, many lucky fans who have attended the show haven't been able to remember it days later. But experts have confirmed, have confirmed this is completely normal. And concert amnesia is a real thing for Taylor Swift fans. Now, I'm not going to make this all about Taylor Swift, but I'll reference her a little bit later in this. We understand that she has gone into the dark side of things. She's fully wrapped up in the satanic agenda, and I believe that she is actually a part of the Monarch mind control program. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But part of the thing is she's using her music and her shows, and it's creating amnesia, exactly as MKUltra was doing back in the 60s and the 70s. That right there is actually part of the MKUltra mind control program that is still going on today. If you have a daughter, and I'm specifically saying daughter, because it's most likely girls, and she's listening to Taylor Swift, you need to make sure that no more. No more. Another thing that was listed in that video that he listed off was manipulation of genes. Now, because I'm on YouTube, I can't necessarily break this down, but I can give it to you in 4 letters. mRNA. Yeah. Would you believe me if I told you that the 2020 COOF stuff is actually wrapped up in this as well? Yeah, can't go much further than that because of YouTube, but I'm sure you get the point. They were working on that back on the MKUltra program back in the 60s and the 70s as well. And that also comes straight from the Nazi program as well, because I've done a history breakdown where the Rockefellers were actually funding back in the early 1900s eugenics programs and gene manipulation, gene therapy programs that Hitler actually designed his off of. That's right. Hitler designed his gene manipulation medical stuff off of a Rockefeller-funded one, and then that came right back around to the CIA. Think about that. They're all together, guys. They're all together. Now, another one that you might have heard about that was a CIA MKUltra success story is this guy. Theodore John Kaczynski, or you might know him as Ted Kaczynski or the Unabomber. Yes, the Unabomber was not only in the MKUltra program, but was a success story of it. Ted Kaczynski, or again, the Unabomber, was indeed part of the project, and he is known for sending 16 bombs to those he believed to be leading technology advancement between 1976 and 1995. He believed that humans were being enslaved by technology, and so he sent bombs to 16 different people to do it. I believe he killed 3 total. Now, Ted K, in his Harvard days, was part of a CIA-funded psychology program. Between the years of 1958 and 1962, Ted volunteered to be the main subject of a psychological project, which was being led by a guy by the name of Dr. Henry Murray. Dr. Henry Murray. Murray, if you got 5 minutes, just go take a look at that dude's rap sheet. This dude is notorious for being a sick and twisted man for what he did. Murray put Ted through several years of psychotic drugs, hypnosis, electroshock therapy, and other undisclosed techniques. Much of it was blacked out on the documents from what I could read. Murray was part of the OSS, or Office of Strategic Services, which eventually became part of the CIA and served as a psychologist for interrogation. Eventually, he ended up serving under, hey, remember this guy? Sidney Gottlieb, who was the leading man of MKUltra. Yes, he ended up serving underneath him. Ted was the perfect target. He was high IQ, extremely young. That's right. He was in Harvard at the age of 16, as well as he was antisocial and often mocked and bullied. Where have we seen that before? Charles Manson, Jim Jones. We got a theme going on here. Ted became Murray's walking time bomb and was considered an MKUltra success story along with Charles Manson. See, part of what they want to do isn't always to grab a hold of somebody and then control every bit of movement. No, what they want to do is create a bomb in somebody's head and then send them out in the public and see what happens. Ted was one of those people where they put a bomb in his head and sent him out to see what would happen. And so it was, in fact, a success story for the MKUltra program. One of the failures, however, that really did expose the MKUltra project, which actually led us to learn much of what we do now, was the murder of a guy by the name of Frank Olson, who was also a bioweapon scientist at the CIA. Frank Olson was part of Operation Sea Spray. If you guys don't know Operation Sea Spray, the U.S. Navy launched a bunch of bacteria into San Francisco to see what would happen as a reaction. Ultimately, a bunch of people got sick. There was red bacteria and stuff all over the ground. Well, Frank Olson was a part of that project to get it done. Frank Olson also was responsible for creating and concocting and building aerosol-based bioweapons of mass destruction during World War II. Now, I know some people would be saying, but that was against the Geneva Convention. Again, do you think the CIA cares? That's right. He was doing something illegal, working on that for the government. But I was told the U.S. government wanted to hurt its own people. Okay. As well as Frank Olson was the creator of anthrax bombs disguised as shaving cream cans. He made it so you can have a shaving cream can, click a button, drop it, and it would start launching anthrax all over the place. Good guy, right? Well, he started to become extremely depressed because he knew what he was doing was wrong. And so he was given a trust test by none other than Sidney Gottlieb. Frank Olson was given LSD under direction of Sidney Gottlieb without Olson having any knowledge or even consent of it. Basically, what happened is Gottlieb took people to a cabin retreat, which he did often. He took 10 guys to a cabin retreat, and he poured them drinks, and he dosed each one of them with a drop of LSD without anybody knowing. they took it, he asked them how they were feeling and recorded their interactions, and ended up telling him that they were all dosed with LSD. The goal was to have a trust test if anybody would actually come forward, spilling the beans about what happened. Frank Olson was the one who wanted to do it. So, because he was depressed, they decided we're going to send a CIA MKUltra psychiatrist to meet with Frank Olson so they can fix him. And so the psychiatrist and Olson ended up meeting at the Statler Hotel in New York City. And that was where, Olson ended up being murdered and thrown out of a 13-story window at 2:30 a.m. on November 28th, 1953, because he was going to come forward with what was going on with the information. And so he was murdered from that. Well, his family ended up diving into things, suing the CIA, finding documents and all that type of stuff, and it ended up releasing a whole bunch of information about MKUltra that we know today. So that was kind of a key. It was a failure for them, but we got some information about what was going on. And so basically they tried to frame it as a self-harming thing. I'm on YouTube and they don't like that word, so I don't want to get taken down. But a self-ending situation. But ultimately it came it was like 30 years later. They ended up finding the truth that he was actually beaten and thrown out the window. So you got some success stories and you got some failures to go along with it. So with all of that, fast forward to 1973, the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, destroyed and shredded countless MKUltra research information as well as documentation. Why? Well, the reason being is because 2 years later, in 1975, the Church Committee began the investigation of what was going on with the MKUltra program as well as the CIA at the time. They wanted to hide the information that was going on. The public believed that MKUltra was then terminated, but there has been no evidence, no documentation, no reports, or even admittance of ending the project. Basically, people came under the idea that MKUltra was terminated after the Church Committee. Not one indicator that it was ever terminated. You think that they're going to spend that much time, research, effort, and money on something and then just end it like that? No, of course not. Keep in mind, as I said, the MKUltra program houses over 150 sub-projects within it, which they could then function separately, individually, without being under the brand of MKUltra, which is ultimately how it's going on. One of them being Operation Spellbinder, which the name alone should tell you everything you need to know. But Operation Spellbinder is one people refer to without even realizing it. We would know it as the Manchurian Candidate. Yes, Operation Spellbinder was built to create sleeper assassins, which is absolutely something that they've got going on today. If you guys don't know anything about the Manchurian Candidate, it's about programming a person's mind and basically telling them to do exactly like the video I showed early on from the CIA document of getting somebody to do the bidding of the controller even against that person's will. And that includes breaking down their societal norms of killing somebody without having any remorse. We've had a few of those guys in the past, haven't we? I'm sure you can think of a few. Yeah. One of the other sub-projects that is ever present today in my mind is one called Monarch Mind Control. This is one that they really try to cover up. There's no official anything on this project, but there sure seems to be a lot of information about it, specific detailed information about it. And anybody who has come out regarding this information has had the label conspiracy theory thrown on them, and they have been just absolutely slandered to death which that's a good indicator that there's probably some truth behind it. Monarch mind control is named after the butterfly, not the system like a lot of people think. The monarch butterfly, and it began in the 1960s with the premise of using satanic rituals, sexual abuse, and multiple personality disorders to control people, mainly in the political, military, and entertainment areas. This is often the case in the entertainment industry where child subjects are the focus, and the targets being 75% female. So they specifically go after female children. The goal is to psychologically, physically, and sexually torture the child so they become disassociated from reality, which allows them to install a brand new personality within the kid. So I mentioned Taylor Swift and stuff. Look at some of the young, specifically female, but some male entertainers who flipped personalities after becoming famous, after they were grabbed a hold of. You'd notice the first couple of years when they were kind of small, they were this person, and then all of a sudden something flipped. They became somebody brand new, whether wild child or robotic. People like Britney Spears, Amanda Bynes, Ellen Page, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, Kesha, Heath Ledger. Everybody wants to blame it on the movie role, but I think there was something much more going on there. Shia LaBeouf as well. Ariana Grande, she's the one that I said, take a look at her when she got early on in her career, and now look at her now. She's a robot. Lindsay Lohan, Megan Fox, Miley Cyrus, Demi Lovato, and so on. You take a look at them, they came in as kids, and then something flipped. Many of these, you will actually find some stories about sexual and physical abuse that were being done while they were in the industry, because the entire entertainment industry is built around satanic rituals, psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. In order to get into the high-ranking areas, kind of like Freemasonry, you have to go through some type of torture and some type of embarrassment, psychological embarrassment. That's why a lot of the time, if you want to reach the next level in Freemasonry, you see a lot of these guys out there dressing in dresses and dressing up like women just for a short period of time. It's because that's part of the torture aspect of what's going on. And so when you see these things, these kids, it's not just they got corrupted. No, there's a actual mind control program going on these kids called Monarch Mind Control, because it's about taking a kid while it's still in its cocoon and then turning it into a butterfly with a brand new personality. That's ultimately what's going on. They take them as kids or still in that young phase and transform them into who they want them to be. This next part is going to be a little rough. It's short, but I want to make sure we understand what's going on. Some of the forms of torture that happen at the Monarch Mind Control program that we know of include things like confinement in boxes, closets, and cages, being tied up and bound by chains and ropes, sometimes hanging from them in uncomfortable positions. Continuous spinning. They will put them on something that will just continue to spin them, and that's a form of torture. Light torture, blinding light torture, not like seizure stuff, flashing lights, but just a super bright light constantly at their face with their eyelids tied open. Sleep, food, and water deprivation, drugs, near-death experiences, putting them in positions where they're they think that they're actually going to die, but it's a controlled environment and they don't. Forced abortions. I'm trying to be gentle with this, but there's really no other way to do it. Committing acts of pedophilia and then forcing abortion upon the child. Forced satanic worship with rituals, as well as desecration of Christian symbolism and language. They will force the kids to worship satanic stuff, be involved with rituals, witness these things, as well as force them to curse and desecrate Christian symbolism and language. Forced surgery. Can you guys go along with what's going on in today, what they're trying to do with kids? Forced surgeries. That's part of it as well. Harm as well as threats to loved ones, their family, and their friends. While doing this, they will be blaming God and saying it's punishment for the things that they've done in their lives. So the person who is doing all of this to the child will then tell them it's because you've been bad and God is punishing you because of it. As well as forced to witness abuse, trauma, or tragedy, which that's part of a different thing that we'll get into later in this series, as well as the use of illusion and digital reality to change perception and create confusion. Social media. That's what that is. It's social media. Part of this new high and whatnot has to do with getting as much likes and views and stuff like that as well, getting people to worship you. Through that, you create a false sense of reality through social media. You create a whole new person, an online persona, and that'll cause illusion as well as a different perception and create confusion in their everyday life. If any of these things sound like they're going on today, it's because they absolutely are going on today. So next time, that's about it for this one. But next time, the next episode that we're doing, we're going to go a little bit further into this Monarch mind control program, as well as we're going to be discussing the Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz techniques that the CIA has deployed, which is part of this program as well. Like I said, I mentioned witnessing abuse, trauma, and tragedy. That's wrapped up a little bit in what we see going on specifically in things like Disney movies and stuff too. We'll be talking about that as well. Mind control through these programs relies so heavily upon satanic, evil, dark, mystic, and occultic pain and trauma practices. This reveals who is truly behind it. Everything is about darkness and pain and cracking the mind of individuals. This is what separates Satan and Jesus Christ, Satan and God. This is what separates them. Satan wants to force you through pain. He wants to force you through manipulation. He wants to force you through trauma. He wants to force you through sexual perversion. He wants to force you through these things. He wants to break open your mind and force you to do these things. Meanwhile, God wants you to choose Him, who is offering life, hope, holiness, and love. There's a big difference between what's going on, and we can use the characteristics that we understand of God in Scripture and realize that the exact opposite of God is what they were doing in these MKUltra programs, who truly reveals who is behind it. And so, yeah, next time we're going to go over a little bit more of the Monarch stuff. We'll go over the Alice in Wonderland. We'll go over Wizard of Oz and the Disneyland stuff, as well as we'll go over some of the roots, the ancient roots of the connections of how it goes from things like ancient Egypt and Babylon to the Rothschild family to what we have today. because there actually is a connection. And so we'll kind of go through that a little bit as well, so we can see where these ideas come from and why they're so wrapped up in the satanic stuff. I'll give you a spoiler. They're trying to accomplish the same stuff that was going on back in Egypt and Babylon.